about sort of flipping around this whole discussion about food and our habits and our relationship with food in a bit of a different way, and looking at those people that we all know in our lives who don't seem to struggle with food. We're going to get into that. If this is your first time catching me live, my name is Sarah Best, and I am a registered holistic nutritionist, but people often joke that I'm the nutritionist who never talks about food. And that's because my approach is a little bit different. I really believe that you already know a lot about what to eat and what to not eat, right? In my experience, people who really struggle with food actually know more than the average person about what foods should be on our plate and which ones maybe are not serving us. So I don't think you need any more information per se about what to eat and what not to eat. I believe that where we really struggle is in the doing it, in the actually staying on track consistently with making the choices we already know we should make, or in avoiding the things that we already know we shouldn't be doing. So that is really where I spend my day, my life, thinking, reading, studying, learning, teaching about how to literally start to reprogram and rewire those old eating habits, patterns, cravings, old behaviors with foods, old thoughts and feelings around foods that keep sabotaging us, that keep us doing this one step forward, three steps back dance that is so frustrating and so maddening at times, and prevent us from really reaching the goals that we want to achieve, whether that be, health, the number on the scale, a mixture, something else, whatever that is for you. So today, this is what I want to dive into. I want to talk about what are those people who don't seem to struggle with food, what are they doing differently? And what can we learn from them that we can start adopting so that we can start to release ourselves from what sometimes feels like a prison around food? Am I right? Okay, so in my experience, again, as somebody who studies this, thinks about this, obsesses about this, maybe a little more than is potentially healthy, I'm fascinated by people's relationship with food. And obviously I work with hundreds of clients and students who struggle with their relationship with food. And they often feel like, they tell me that they wish they could eat to live instead of living to eat. They wish that food didn't have so much control over them. They wish that that their default setting could just be making the healthy choices instead of this sort of constant obsessing about what should I eat? What did I eat? What will I eat? When will I eat? How much should I eat? Should I eat this? Shouldn't I eat that? Beating themselves up about what they did eat. It's, So we all have, I think, if you think about it, that friend. And while I was sort of thinking about this, and as I've been thinking about this, I was thinking about some of the people in my life who you sort of look at like they're a strange unicorn. Like they seem to have this effortless relationship with food. They say things like, I forget to eat. It's always one that I can honestly, I think, say in my life, I have never forgotten to eat. But I have friends who tell me they forget to eat. They can, go to a party or a barbecue or, to a vacation buffet and not even really notice some of the food, right? They sit around, bowls of potato chips everywhere. They don't even notice them. They can eat, they're given maybe a piece of birthday cake at the party or whatever, and they eat half and then they just put the other half down. They don't have it. Don't even notice it. Don't even remember it. Like it's even in all the work I've done, and even though I have utterly transformed my relationship with food from where I used to be as like an emotional binge eater, nighttime binging till I was nauseous, to where I am now, where I have a much more healthy, consistent, utterly transformed relationship with food. But it's still, work that I do. It's always going to be, I think, a little bit of who I am. I have incredible tools now, incredible strategies. I literally have reprogrammed the way my brain thinks about food. So I have enormous amount of freedom now around food that I didn't have before. But those people in my life still just fascinate me. So let's dive into what I think 3 of the keys, and I'm sure there's lots, but what are some of what I identified as three of the key things that those people, the people that you know in your life that don't seem to struggle with food, these are three things that I think that they're doing that we're often not doing and that we could adopt and start to think about and start to use in our own lives. And these are things you can start doing today. So obviously I'm going to make gross generalizations here, right? This is a bit of a fun exercise, but I'm going to make gross generalizations about people who don't seem to struggle with food. And so obviously every individual is different, but I'm going to grossly generalize just because, again, I think it's helpful for us to look to people who have the relationship with food that we want and look at what they're doing and what we can mirror and mimic that might help us. Okay. So the first one is, if you've ever followed my work or if you've read my book or done any of my programs, you know that I'm fascinated with the neuroscience behind our relationship with food. I'm fascinated by the neurochemistry of dopamine, of serotonin, of other neurotransmitters that are so deeply connected to cravings and creating, unhealthy habits around food. I'm also absolutely fascinated by the neurocircuitry in our brains around food. And what I mean by that is like the actual neural pathways that are created in your brain when you learn certain behaviors, when you repeat certain behaviors, in this case around food. So at some level, those people that have a really healthy relationship with food or a seemingly healthy relationship with food, they just have a different kind of neurocircuitry from you and I. They just do. They just don't have those deep neural pathways connecting food and feelings, happiness, joy, connection, love, right? For whatever reason, in their experience, they just didn't, those neural pathways were never laid down. That foundation was never built, maybe back to when they were kids. They just don't associate food with love, food with relaxation, with joy, with happiness, with connection, with treating yourself. Now, it's not to say that they don't have unhealthy neural circuitry in other areas. I'm not suggesting these people are perfect. They probably have other things, other coping mechanisms that they use maybe that aren't healthy, right? Maybe they're chronic shoppers. Maybe they're drug addicts. Maybe they're gambling addicts. Maybe they're, who knows? And maybe you don't have that neural circuitry, right? Maybe gambling is not, you could take it or leave it, just like they could take or leave the cake. Maybe you don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars doing online shopping for things you don't need, and maybe they do, right? So it's not that they're better or worse, just in this area, they have a different kind of neural circuitry. And also, I just want to, just stop here for a second, just explain that this is one of the reasons why we need to stop beating ourselves up about the not so great food choices we sometimes make, because we are those of us who struggle with food in this way, we are almost always dealing with old neural circuitry, old neural pathways that connect food with positive feelings. And so we just have to be aware of that. And again, the wonderful thing that we know now about the human brain and this new area of study called neuroplasticity, which is all about changing those old neural pathways, which we're more and more realizing we can do. Something I dive deep into in my Change Your Brain, Change Your Body program and in my work with my clients. You can change those old neural pathways if you know how to do it and you know what you're doing and you can become aware of them. But this is the first biggest difference, right? Those people who have a good relationship with food, they just don't have the neural circuitry that we have. Again, it's not to say they don't have neural pathways around other things that are maybe causing them frustration with themselves, causing them to, participate in not so healthy behaviors that they wish they didn't, all that stuff. But in this area around food, that neural circuitry just doesn't exist as deeply. Right? So they're not fighting themselves every time there's a bowl of potato chips around or a piece of birthday cake. So it's just different, right? So that's just something to be aware of. And again, know that what we know now is that you can break old neural pathways and you can create new ones around new, healthier behaviors. And when you do that, those new, healthier behaviors start to feel more automatic. They start to feel more natural. They become your new default. All right. And so this is very doable. And again, something we dive deep into in my Change Your Brain, Change Your Body program, which is my flagship program. So just know that it's not your fault, right? You do have your brain is wired differently. It just is. It's not a weakness. It's not that you lack willpower. It's not that you're not strong enough or committed enough. It's none of those things. You literally have different neural circuitry going on. Okay. But it's changeable. So that's an area to start learning about and thinking about, and instead of beating yourself up for the choices you're making, thinking about how you can start to change those neural pathways. All right. The second thing that I think is really different in people who don't struggle with food so much, don't obsess about food, have some freedom around food, and you and I, is that I think that for the most part, and again, gross generalization here, excuse me, but I think for the most part, they are a little more connected to their bodies. So the other thing I often hear people who have what I would suggest is maybe a healthier relationship with food than some of us do is they'll say things like, oh, I don't want to eat that because I won't feel good if I do, right? Like with the birthday cake, they'll eat half and then they'll say something like, oh, if I eat the rest of that, I know I'm not going to feel good. Now, again, for wherever you are on this journey, I'm going to be fully transparent here. And again, say that even though my relationship with food is so much better now, and I do have so much freedom around food now, hallelujah. There is still a part of me, the old Sarah, that was not my experience. My experience was someone gives you a piece of birthday cake, you eat half of it, you feel a little nauseous, but you fully eat the other half and maybe go back for seconds, right? Like the idea that not feeling good would slow me down in terms of what I was eating, that wasn't happening. So, and because my desire for the food and the sense that the food was going to bring me something, joy, peace, happiness, something, or that, there might not, I might run out. I might not get more later, right? This eating for future hunger, all of that stuff going on was overriding any concern I had about how I was feeling. And I would often eat to the point of nausea, often. So I think that people who do have a healthier relationship with food, don't do that as much, right? They really do honor the way their bodies feel. They don't want to do things that don't feel good, which seems sort of obvious, but I think if you're sort of nodding, like, you know what I mean, that if you have kind of a not so great, a problematic relationship with food, you often eat past where your body feels good because we're eating for other reasons. So I think that's interesting to note and important to consider in terms of doing the work and just being more aware of how your body's feeling. Slow down more when you're eating, multitask less, right? All those old adages of mindful eating that I've been teaching for years. So powerful here because that's how you really start to connect in with how your body's feeling. And also training your brain, reminding yourself that there's always going to be more cake, right? There's no cake shortage in the world. So you can eat half a piece of cake and know that if you desperately need cake at some future point, you can eat it then, right? You don't have to, force feed yourself the other half of the piece of cake that you don't need and won't make you feel good, for fear of never having a cake again. So again, just interesting to be aware of. I think there's so much power just in awareness. I always, one of my mantras is replace judgment with curiosity. So put aside the judgment and get curious about why you're eating past the point of feeling good for your body, and think about how you can more step into honoring how your body's really feeling and making choices that really support it and nourish your body, right? Again, knowing that there is no cake shortage in the world. And if you desperately need cake at a future date, you can probably get it. Okay. So that's number 2. I think that those people who have a healthier relationship with food are, generally speaking, more connected to their bodies and honoring how their bodies feel is more of a priority. So something to learn for ourselves. And finally, I think that those people have developed better, or maybe just different, maybe not better, but different coping skills for things like stress, boredom, worry, right, than we have. So for those of us that struggle with food, almost always, very often, we are using food as a way to manage feelings, uncomfortable feelings of stress, boredom, worry, loneliness. And I think that people who have a better relationship with food have different and potentially better coping mechanisms for those uncomfortable feelings. So when they're stressed, they're not turning to food. Now, again, they may have positive coping mechanisms. They may be turning to things like meditation, journaling, talking to a friend, you know, thinking about the thoughts that they're choosing, right? Managing their own thoughts, all of those different kinds of more positive coping mechanisms. Or they may be just using other unhealthy coping mechanisms. Maybe they're drinking too much. Again, maybe they're shopping too much. Maybe they're gambling. Maybe they could be doing anything. But we're not all that interested in their lives. It's just interesting to know that they're not using food as a coping mechanism for uncomfortable feelings. And we generally are. So again, just really interesting to note that that's one of the reasons they have some freedom around food, is that they're not using it as a way to cope with uncomfortable feelings. And so how can we start to think about better ways of coping with our feelings? Because again, it's not just about beating yourself up and thinking like, oh, I shouldn't be stressed, or I shouldn't be worried, or I shouldn't be tired, or, we tend to go into the beating ourselves up. It's often what we do. And instead thinking like, oh, I'm not in a good space right now. I'm stressed, I'm worried, I'm lonely, I'm feeling sort of empty, whatever, I'm bored. Okay, I'm feeling that. What's something I could do? What's something more positive and arguably much more effective that I could do with that uncomfortable feeling than turning to food, which is never the solution, right? Food will give you a momentary little high, little dopamine hit, but it's never going to address the actual feeling, and it's only going to make things worse because it's going to spiral you down then into adding self-judgment on top of what you're already feeling. So again, given that that is one of the key characteristics of people that have a freer, more peaceful, healthier relationship with food, they're not using food as a way to manage feelings, to cope with uncomfortable feelings. How can we take a page from that book and start to think of better, healthier, more effective ways of dealing with feelings like stress, boredom, discomfort? And again, this is something we do a whole module about self-care and really self-love in the Change Your Brain, Change Your Body program, because it's such a big piece of the puzzle, right? Again, we are very often, almost always, using food as a way to manage uncomfortable feelings. So we have to address that. We have to address the feelings. We have to put in better coping mechanisms. We have to learn how to literally start to control, reprogram our own thoughts and feelings. And these things are all very doable once you have the tools. So I hope that's helpful. This was a little bit of a fun, sort of a tongue-in-cheek look at, turning to those people that we all know in our lives who, don't seem to struggle with food, and looking at what they're doing differently and what we can learn from them. And again, just to recap, I think the 3 keys that they're doing differently is they literally just have different neural circuitry. Their brains are wired differently. And again, the way your brain is wired is the result of just experiences you've had and repeated for your lifetime. So they have just had a different experience. They've just repeated different behaviors for their lifetime around food. Again, it's not to say they're perfect. I'm sure they have lots of other areas where they're making unhealthy choices, where they're, they have different neural circuitry that's causing them problems, and they might look to you and think, how is she doing that? But in this area of food, they literally are wired differently. But what we know now about the neural circuitry of the brain is that we can change those old neural pathways. You do not have to be stuck with the old wiring that you have had, that old operating system that has been sabotaging you up till now. And this is, the cornerstone of really what I teach. Second, I think that they're connected to their bodies in a different way. They're willing to make choices that better honor the way they feel. So they know that eating the whole piece of cake or a second piece of cake is not going to feel good. And so they don't do it. It seems so simple, but as somebody who has struggled with food for most of my life, there's many, many times when I have consciously eaten things when I totally knew it was going to make me feel awful. And I'm sure that you can relate to that a little bit. So just stepping into, what would it look like to really make choices that better honored my body, the way I want to feel, the energy I want to have. Just something to think about. And finally, having better coping techniques, right? Those people, they're not using food to manage their feelings. And again, it's not to say they're not using other unhealthy things to manage their feelings. They probably are. But they're not using food. And so we need to remember that, right? That we need to be thinking about other coping mechanisms. You're going to have stress. You're alive. So there's going to be stress. There's going to be worry. You're going to feel lonely. You're going to feel adrift sometimes. You're going to be exhausted sometimes. That's going to happen. So how can we stop turning to food to address that and instead turn to, come up with other coping mechanisms? And again, I think this is really about self-care, self-love, something I teach a lot about. Having those routines and rituals and that framework in place so that you can turn to it when you need it, right? Instead of the food. All right. So I hope this was helpful, just thinking about, how those people, that person in your life that seems to, be completely completely immune to the power of food. How is she doing it? How is he doing it? And what can we learn from them? All right. Okay. Hope it was helpful. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this. And I will see you next time.